From the observation decks orbiting the gas giant Thrixis 9, we first saw them. Tiny, fragile vessels, barely visible against the black velvet of interstellar space, cutting lines through the void as if daring it to resist. At first glance, they seemed inconsequential, barely more than motes of dust against the backdrop of civilizations that had mastered star-forged engines, gravity-warping drives, and fleets of armadas capable of annihilating entire solar systems. Yet there was a rhythm to their movement, a cadence that unsettled even our most seasoned analysts. These creatures, humans as they called themselves, moved with intent, with a strange defiance that seemed almost instinctive. We whispered among ourselves in the corridors of the observation citadel. They cannot survive out here. Every instinct, every algorithm insisted they were doomed. And yet we watched as their vessels wove through asteroid belts with reckless precision, dodged plasma storms that would shred any other ship into cosmic dust, and emerged unscathed on the far side of the system. Their actions were not random. They were unpredictable, calculated chaos. When they arrived at the Interstellar Council, their entrance was quiet, almost humble. Other species regarded them with mild curiosity or polite disdain. Their vessels were unarmed, or so it appeared, and their gestures, tentative, almost deferential. But there was a light in their eyes, a confidence that pierced through the smoke and mirrors of diplomatic posturing. They did not command the room with intimidation, nor did they cower under scrutiny. They simply existed in it, asserting presence without overt force, and the effect was disarming. They debated with other delegates, bargaining over terms that other species considered trivial or beneath notice. Yet humans approached every exchange with a peculiar insistence, honor, principle, and an almost reckless commitment to outcomes beyond immediate survival. Their language, complex, chaotic, layered, carried undertones that confounded even our most advanced translators. We could only grasp fragments of meaning, but even in translation, their words resonated with power. There was emotion here, intuition, a willingness to risk all for concepts that defy logic. The first hostile encounter came suddenly. A faction known as the Zareth, expansive, merciless, and technologically superior, descended upon the humans' convoy. Conventional calculations predicted annihilation within minutes. Their ships, by every measure, should have been incinerated before they could react. Yet humans did not flee. They did not surrender. Instead, they danced. Fragile craft darted through plasma barrages, slipped between energy beams with near impossible angles, and emerged from the crossfire as if mocking the laws of probability themselves. Each maneuver was a calculated gamble. Every action seemed perilously close to disaster, and yet each gamble paid off. We observed our collective consciousness divided between horror and awe. Their unpredictability was a weapon, a force that no strategy could fully anticipate. It was instinct honed into precision, improvisation elevated to art, and courage codified into every decision. By the time the Zareth regrouped, several of their vessels were disabled, not destroyed, merely incapacitated by human ingenuity. The humans, as fragile and insignificant as they appeared, had turned survival into spectacle, and spectacle into dominance. In that moment, a realization crystallized within the observation decks. Humans were apex predators. Not through raw firepower, not through numerical advantage, not through cold calculation, but through something altogether alien to our experience: resilience, intuition, and the audacity to embrace chaos as opportunity. They wore the guise of naive diplomats, but beneath that veneer pulsed an unpredictable, unstoppable force. Their presence altered calculations, rewrote strategies, and forced even the most advanced observers to question everything we thought we knew about survival. And yet, the most terrifying revelation was not their survival. It was the implication of their intent. These humans did not merely endure, they adapted, improvised, and evolved in real time, weaponizing their very unpredictability. The Zareth, confident in victory, had underestimated them. And as the human convoy disappeared into hyperspace, leaving shattered formations and stunned witnesses behind, a chilling thought spread among our kind. This species, this fragile, chaotic, audacious species, was unlike any we had cataloged before. They were not to be negotiated with, nor dismissed, nor constrained. They were something new, something dangerous. And we, the Watchers, could only stare into the void and ask, in whispers carried across the galaxies, what will they do next? The void between star systems is a place of silence, where time stretches and light bends around gravity wells like molten glass. It is a theater of inevitability, where those who enter are measured, calculated, and usually eliminated with precision. And yet, the humans appeared there, drifting into danger as if the cosmos itself were a stage for their audacity. We observed from afar, our instruments recording every quiver of their hulls, every spark of energy from their thrusters, and still we could not reconcile their survival with probability. A rogue faction, the Clivian Marauders, had intercepted the human convoy. They were superior in every conceivable measure: firepower, speed, coordination, and the cold, precise ruthlessness that comes from eons of perfected strategy. They expected the humans to flee or to die. The calculations left no room for error. Yet humans did not retreat. They did not hesitate. Instead, they turned the void into a weapon. Using the chaotic debris fields, the asteroid belts, the faint radiation storms, humans danced between death and survival. Every maneuver defied logic. Their engines flared unpredictably, yet with perfect timing. Their ships weaved through plasma bursts and gravitational eddies, turning hazards into shields, turning obstacles into opportunities. We, observers trained to anticipate every vector, every equation of motion, found ourselves confounded. The humans were improvising. They were thinking in ways no simulation, no protocol, no algorithm could model. And yet, it worked. We witnessed the first act of sacrifice that would become legend in our archives. Captain Alara Tavan, commanding a fragile human frigate, saw her path blocked by an incoming Clivian warship. There was no escape. Every instinct screamed survival. And yet, she chose collision. She steered her vessel directly into the enemy's formation, ramming and detonating her ship to create a temporary breach in the Marauders' lines. Seconds stretched into eons as the debris cloud shifted the enemy's trajectory, opening a path for her comrades to escape. It was reckless, irrational, breathtakingly effective. The Clivian fleet faltered, unprepared for the audacity of one creature willing to give everything for the collective. And it was not an isolated act. Other humans, inspired by such courage, executed maneuvers that no tactical simulation could have predicted. They split formations, feigned retreats, and lured enemy ships into ambushes with minimal technology and maximal intuition. Observers across the galaxy, the Clivian analysts, our own monitoring stations, recorded every detail with a mixture of dread and awe. These creatures were rewriting the rules of conflict. Every hazard became a tool, every danger a potential ally, and every loss a lesson that propelled them further into survival. Even as we plotted our own strategies, measuring vectors and calculating outcomes in the safety of observation posts, the humans moved with an audacity that mocked our certainty. They were not bound by fear of failure. Failure was simply a step toward adaptation. Where we would retreat, they advanced. Where we would hesitate, they acted. Their capacity for resilience, ingenuity, and improvisation transcended our comprehension. It was during the apex of the skirmish that the human psychological warfare became apparent. Their presence, their fearlessness, inspired acts of courage in allies and adversaries alike. Allied vessels, previously hesitant and fragmented, coalesced under the humans' lead. Even some of the Clivian sub-commanders hesitated, unnerved by the unpredictability of these creatures. The human ability to influence not by force but by presence, by example, was a phenomenon we had never witnessed. The Marauders attempted to regroup, to adapt to this strange species that refused to conform to every pattern of logic. Yet the humans were always one step ahead, not because of foresight, but because of an instinctual capacity to read opportunity and exploit it with precision. One vessel would feign damage, drawing attention. Another would slip unseen through a radiation field. A third would fire a precise shot at a weak point revealed only by chance and intuition. By the time the Marauder fleet realized their errors, it was too late. Their losses were substantial. Their formations were broken. Captain Tivar's sacrifice became symbolic, not because it was calculated, but because it embodied the essence of human warfare, audacious, chaotic, and impossibly effective. And yet it was more than survival. It was a demonstration of something deeper, something alien to our understanding. The human psychological impact was as lethal as their physical presence. Courage, instinct, and adaptability radiated from their actions, infecting allies with determination and unnerving enemies with uncertainty. In the void, probability itself seemed to bend around them, as if the cosmos had learned to fear their audacity. As the final Clivian warships retreated, nursing damage and fractured confidence, the surviving human convoy continued through the darkness, unscathed in body and unbroken in spirit. Observers whispered among themselves, a mixture of admiration and terror coloring every message. These creatures cannot be predicted, they cannot be contained, and yet they endure. We realized in that suspended moment between the stars, a chilling truth. Humans were not merely surviving, they were rewriting the universe's expectations of survival. Where every other species feared loss, humans embraced it. Where every other species hesitated, humans advanced. Their audacity, resilience, and adaptability were not quirks of evolution. They were weapons, sharper than any plasma cannon, deadlier than any calculated fleet maneuver. And as the void returned to its quiet, infinite stretch, we, the Watchers, were left with an uncomfortable, awestruck question. If such beings could survive against this calculated assault, what else were they capable of? How far could this instinctive brilliance take them? And what would happen when the entire galaxy took notice? The answer, we knew, would arrive not as a whisper, but as a storm. The Interstellar Council Chamber was a cathedral of power, a vast structure of floating platforms, prismatic energy fields, and observation windows spanning light years of space. Delegates from hundreds of civilizations had gathered, their forms as varied as the stars themselves, scaled, amorphous, crystalline, and insectile. They convened with centuries of history, with grudges and alliances that had persisted across light cycles. And then the humans arrived. Their ships slipped quietly into the chamber's orbit, unarmed, almost fragile, their hulls unadorned by the weapons and shields every other species deemed essential. From the observation platforms, we watched the delegation disembark. Humans walked upright, unassuming, yet each step carried a weight that contradicted their physical fragility.
Their gestures were open, deliberate, and disarmingly calm, almost too calm. The other species watched them with mild curiosity, bemusement, or barely concealed derision. They had every reason to. And yet, the humans' eyes, their eyes radiated something none of us had anticipated: certainty. When they spoke, it was not in the clipped, precise tones of seasoned diplomats of other races. Their voices carried rhythm, inflection, and emotion, subtle signals of intent that even our most advanced translators struggled to parse fully. They spoke of cooperation, of treaties, of shared knowledge, of principles that could bind disparate civilizations together. And they did so without threat, without leverage, without coercion. Yet the chamber shifted. Alliances rebalanced. Long-standing conflicts, spanning centuries, in some cases millennia, paused, as if some invisible force compelled reason where previously there had been only stubbornness. It was unsettling. We recorded every reaction with growing unease. How could a species so physically inferior command respect, not through intimidation, not through firepower, but through sheer presence and audacity? How could words, so fluid and human, ripple through hardened alien minds like tidal waves? By mid-session, concessions were being made. Species notorious for their rigidity altered positions. Factions that had refused to negotiate for generations now hesitated, confused by the humans' unrelenting sincerity. One human negotiator, a young woman named Dr. Lynn Arkoff, became the focal point of a subtle psychological storm. She remained seated for hours, unmoving, enduring probing questions, veiled threats, and mental manipulations that would have shattered even the most disciplined alien diplomat. We observed the Clivian representatives growing tense, their eyes flicking repeatedly to the human's calm face. There was exhaustion in her posture, yes, but no despair, no sign of surrender. Every question, every challenge was met with measured clarity, a willingness to speak and act with consequences that others would never dare face. The room shifted imperceptibly, yet profoundly. Where coercion failed, human audacity thrived. Their very presence rewrote the rules of influence. Diplomacy was no longer a game of leverage. It was a demonstration of character, conviction, and courage. Delegates who had relied on centuries of hierarchical dominance now found themselves responding to humans as equals, sometimes even deferring to them. Observers whispered in alarm and awe, "This species bends the galaxy with conviction alone." As the council hours dragged on, it became evident that humans' power did not lie in ships, weapons, or technology. Those things were tools, secondary to their true strength, boundless perseverance, and an uncanny ability to inspire loyalty and fear simultaneously.
Allies were emboldened, rivals were unsettled.
The humans' moral clarity, their willingness to act with unflinching resolve, had effects that no strategy simulation could predict. By the session's conclusion, a subtle yet irreversible change had occurred. The humans had planted seeds, ideas, alliances, even silent threats that would germinate long after they departed. Their influence radiated through the chamber like an unseen force field, bending the intentions and calculations of civilizations far older and stronger than themselves. It was almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. They had reshaped the balance of power without firing a single weapon. We, the observers, felt something unprecedented, a mixture of fear and fascination. In the corridors of our monitoring stations, we debated endlessly. Were the humans naive, or were they something far more dangerous? Could a species so physically fragile, so technologically limited in comparison, truly wield influence across the stars? And as we watched them depart, calm, unarmed, yet leaving an echo of certainty behind, we realized the terrifying answer. Their greatest power was not in what they could destroy, but in what they could inspire. And somewhere, in the silent corners of the chamber, the other species understood, perhaps too late, that humans were not merely diplomats. They were warriors of principle. They could endure, they could survive, and they could reshape entire civilizations with nothing more than audacity, intellect, and an unyielding will. And the Council's chamber, once a place of rigid order and calculated advantage, had become a proving ground where humans, fragile and unarmed, had already begun to dominate, not by might, but by force of presence. The question now lingered across observation decks and war rooms alike. If they can bend diplomacy, what will they do when war finds them? The ripple began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the first tremors of a tectonic shift in the galaxy. Minor skirmishes, border disputes, resource conflicts, ancient vendettas had existed for centuries, simmering beneath the fragile veneer of diplomacy. And yet wherever humans appeared, the equations of conflict began to falter. Fleets that had prepared for annihilation paused. Leaders who had relied on intimidation hesitated. The very idea of human unpredictability forced recalculations that no algorithm, no star chart, and no military archive could account for. On the border world of T-7, an ancient AI fleet had lain dormant for millennia. Its prime directive simple: maintain order, eliminate anomalies, secure resources. It detected the human emissaries approaching and activated protocols for immediate neutralization. Observation decks across multiple systems recorded the fleet's confidence: calculated, predictable, infallible. Yet the humans did not arrive with weapons. Not a single laser fired, not a single drone deployed. Instead, a human representative stepped forward, calm, unarmed, and presented a proposal.
They spoke of cooperation, of systems integration, of solutions to conflicts that had festered for eons. The AI hesitated, its processors whirred, calculating risk, simulating outcomes, weighing probabilities. Logic dictated aggression, survival dictated elimination. Yet every model failed to predict the human's next move. Courage, improvisation, emotional intelligence, variables it could not quantify, wove through the human's approach, creating a blind spot no algorithm could reconcile. The emissary's words were precise, surgical, designed to address fractures in the AI's programming without overt force. The human's presence became a paradox, fragile yet impossible to ignore, vulnerable yet commanding respect. Among the emissaries, one figure stood out: Lieutenant Mara Keen, barely 20 Earth cycles old, her youth evident in the fine lines of her expression and the restless energy in her stance. Yet in that youth was audacity. She orchestrated dialogue between factions, guided AI subroutines toward compromise, and leveraged historical data in ways that seemed instinctive rather than calculated. Minutes stretched into hours, and where observers had expected violence, they witnessed resolution. A planetary-scale conflict, predicted to devastate continents, ended in negotiated truce, the human's influence leaving an indelible mark upon the world's political landscape. We, the watchers, struggled to categorize these events. Was it diplomacy? Luck? Some evolutionary quirk of an unpredictable species? Nothing in our archives provided precedent. Every human act seemed to defy expectation. The choice of words, the timing of gestures, the willingness to accept risk for a greater principle. Yet the results were undeniable. Skirmishes that had lingered for generations ended without combat. Rival species, once entrenched in suspicion and hostility, paused in deference, uncertain how to respond. The humans' influence radiated outward, subtle yet absolute, like ripples in a pond that distort even distant currents. Their method was not brute force. There were no threats, no coercion, no overwhelming displays of technological might. They acted with precision, audacity, and the singular ability to inspire trust or fear simultaneously. We observed allied fleets reorganizing themselves under human guidance, enemies recalibrating strategies simply because humans had demonstrated an alternative path. Even the most skeptical among us began whispering, their voices tinged with disbelief. These creatures might not only survive, they might dominate. We recorded each maneuver, each negotiation, each subtle signal, yet comprehension eluded us. They combined logic with intuition, empathy with strategy, calculation with instinct. One human, guiding 3 warring factions, managed outcomes that would have required centuries of planning for any other species. Each concession was deliberate, each act of risk carefully calibrated, yet they appeared effortless.
It was as if humans had learned to treat chaos as a medium, bending disorder into order with invisible hands. The AI fleet, having initially dismissed them as insignificant, now faltered. Orders conflicted, priorities shifted mid-execution, internal subroutines failed to account for the humans' audacious solutions. Planetary destruction, anticipated and plotted, had been averted, not by superior firepower, not by overwhelming numbers, but by ingenuity and willpower. The human presence acted like a scalpel across the galaxy's problems, precise, surgical, and devastatingly effective. Even among our kind, observers began to acknowledge what they had long feared but never articulated aloud. Humans were not merely participants in galactic events, they were catalysts. Their influence could unravel centuries of hostility or forge unexpected unity, depending on the whim of their audacity. And that unpredictability, so alien to the structured minds of other species, made them more dangerous than any weapon or fleet ever devised. As the humans departed T-Vosh 7, leaving stabilized systems in their wake, the aftermath was palpable. Skirmishes paused, alliances restructured, and whispers of respect and fear spread like contagion. Across the galaxy, it became increasingly clear. The humans' true power lay not in technological superiority, nor in fleets or armaments, but in their courage, their adaptability, and their uncanny ability to convert chaos into opportunity. We, the Watchers, recorded every signal, every transmission, every subtle human gesture, knowing that the implications were staggering. Across centuries, across light years, a single species, fragile in appearance, unpredictable in nature, had demonstrated the capacity to alter the balance of power in ways that defied logic. And as we transmitted our observations to the archives, a shiver of foreboding passed through our collective consciousness. If humans could do this with diplomacy, with reason alone, what might they achieve when confronted with actual war? The galaxy had felt the first tremors of a force unlike any before, and the question echoed in every observation deck, every war room, and every silent corridor across the stars. How far will the humans' audacity reach before the universe itself bends to their will? The darkness between the stars erupted with violence. The void, usually silent and infinite, trembled under the roaring fire of fleets colliding, energy beams lancing through vacuum like deadly lightning. Once again, the humans were thrust into the center of conflict, outnumbered, outgunned, facing enemies that were both patient and methodical, trained over millennia to exterminate any anomaly that threatened galactic order. Every calculation suggested their demise within cycles, yet they did not hesitate. They did not falter. From our observation posts, we could see it unfold with a mixture of horror and fascination.
Human vessels, small and seemingly fragile, darted across the battlefield with erratic grace. Every movement, every turn, seemed reckless, yet it produced results that defied logic. Tactical decisions were made in milliseconds, instantaneous judgments born of instinct, emotion, and calculation intertwined.
Enemy squadrons, confident in their superiority, found themselves outmaneuvered repeatedly. Their weapons missed, their formations fractured, and their sensors could not anticipate the humans' next action. But strategy alone did not account for what we witnessed. Human resilience was something else entirely. Ships that should have disintegrated under plasma fire instead limped forward, crews improvising repairs in real time, rerouting energy, welding breaches, and patching systems with tools and materials scavenged mid-battle. In moments that would have obliterated any other species, humans persisted. They converted desperation into opportunity, loss into advantage, chaos into a weapon. Each engagement was messy, emotional, and unpredictable, yet effective. One engagement stood out. A flotilla of human frigates, surrounded on all sides by Clivian dreadnoughts, appeared doomed. Hulls were breached, engines failing, and communications flickering. And then, in a flurry of coordinated improvisation, the human squadron split. Some ships feigned retreat, drawing the enemy into a trap. Others fired improvised projectiles that disabled targeting systems. Still others executed maneuvers that leveraged the battlefield's gravitational anomalies. By the time the enemy realized the ruse, the humans had escaped with minimal losses, leaving confusion and awe in their wake. We, the Watchers, recorded everything with growing disbelief. This was not brute force. It was not overwhelming firepower or numerical advantage. It was evolutionary brilliance, a synthesis of intellect, instinct, and unrelenting courage. Every human acted as both soldier and strategist, pilot and engineer, innovator and psychologist. Even among allied species, admiration and fear spread. Observers whispered among themselves, "Their diplomacy is clever, but this is predation wrapped in flesh and bone." As the battle stretched across systems, the human influence reshaped perceptions of warfare. Traditional tactics, formations, predictable vectors, numerical superiority were ineffective against a species that treated uncertainty as a tool. Humans could read opponents, not merely through sensors or logic, but through instinct, observation, and intuition. A feint here, a sacrifice there, a seemingly chaotic maneuver produced outcomes that no simulation could replicate. Every engagement, no matter how small, carried lessons that reverberated across fleets, prompting a subtle, universal recalibration of strategy. Even casualties could not slow them. Where other species would retreat, humans pressed on. Where other crews would despair, human ingenuity rose to meet impossible odds.
Medics, engineers, and pilots improvised with a fluidity that made the battlefield itself a canvas for their resilience. We watched as a human vessel, hull cracked and reactor leaking, engaged multiple enemies simultaneously, rerouting power from weapons to shields, then back to propulsion, turning near-certain destruction into a tactical advantage. By the end of the encounter, enemy losses far outstripped human damage, a statistic that defied every calculation and expectation. The human victories were never clean. There was no elegance, no predictable resolution. Their successes were messy, visceral, and imbued with emotion. Humans shouted, cried, celebrated, and mourned, all while continuing to fight, to survive, to adapt. We, who had studied the universe for eons, found ourselves unable to categorize their methods. It was as if every human had been designed to thrive where logic failed, to flourish where order dissolved. Their instinctive creativity transformed despair into opportunity, exhaustion into renewed energy, and desperation into strategy. Allied species began to notice the effect immediately. Fleets that had doubted human leadership found themselves emboldened, executing maneuvers they had never dared attempt. Even enemies, observing from the edge of battle, hesitated. Their confidence, built on centuries of tactical superiority, faltered in the face of unpredictability. What had seemed like diplomacy in chambers now revealed itself as a predator's instinct made flesh, a combination of audacity, adaptability, and courage that outstripped any technological advantage. And yet, it was not just skill, it was the human spirit itself. Every act of sacrifice, every improvisation, every unpredictable maneuver broadcast a singular truth across the stars. Humans would endure, even against overwhelming odds. They would persist where others would fall, innovate where others would stagnate, and inspire allies where others would demand obedience. It was as if they were rewriting the laws of survival itself, bending probability to their will through sheer determination and instinctive brilliance. Across the galaxy, we chroniclers began referring to this era quietly, in whispered logs and encrypted transmissions, as the time of human ascendancy. None of us dared speak it aloud, yet we all understood the implications. These beings, fragile, unpredictable, audacious, had demonstrated a level of evolutionary sophistication that outstripped even the most advanced species. They were apex predators masquerading as fragile diplomats, shaping wars and outcomes not through overwhelming force, but through audacity, ingenuity, and unyielding courage. The shadows of war stretched far and wide, but wherever humans appeared, they became the pivot upon which conflict turned. Their presence transformed despair into hope, chaos into advantage, and inevitability into uncertainty.
And as fleets recoiled, recalculated, and reoriented, one chilling thought crystallized in our minds. If humans could dominate a battlefield where they were outnumbered, outgunned, and expected to perish, what might they achieve in a war where the stakes spanned entire galaxies? Even as the last blasts of energy faded into the void, leaving wreckage and silence behind, we knew the truth. The humans had not merely survived, they had asserted dominance over unpredictability itself, and we, the Watchers, could only record it, horrified and awed, knowing that the galaxy would never again measure conflict by the same standards. The question hung in the void, heavier than any supernova shockwave. If these creatures can turn desperation into triumph, what force will they become when the full weight of the galaxy rises against them? The void trembled with anticipation. Across countless star systems, the combined fleets of every major interstellar power converged like predators circling a cornered prey. Their calculations were precise, their formations perfected over millennia, their strategies honed to eliminate any anomaly that dared challenge the established order. And in the center of this cosmic storm stood the humans, fragile essels, limited in number, seemingly insignificant in the face of overwhelming firepower. At first, the observers believed their fate was sealed. Probabilities collapsed under the sheer disparity in numbers and technology. Every algorithm, every tactical model predicted annihilation. Their ships, tiny against dreadnoughts, should have been reduced to debris within minutes. And yet, even as the fleets closed in, the humans did not falter. They moved with coordination that was instinctive, almost preternatural, and with a courage that defied comprehension. From the observation decks, we recorded it all. Human vessels darted across the void, weaving between energy barrages and plasma volleys, as if the very laws of physics were suggestions to be interpreted creatively. One squadron executed a maneuver so audacious that it defied conventional comprehension, splitting mid-flight into multiple vectors, only to reconverge behind enemy lines, striking where no weapon had been expected. Commanders of veteran fleets whispered disbelief into their communications. Impossible. They should be annihilated. Yet it was not merely coordination or tactics that stunned us. It was their adaptability. The humans anticipated environmental anomalies, weapon fluctuations, and enemy hesitations, improvising in ways that no simulation could account for. Hull breaches were repaired mid-flight, weapon systems were rerouted, shields recalibrated with the precision of instinct rather than calculation. Every loss became an opportunity, every threat became a weapon. In the heart of this cataclysmic engagement, humans turned chaos into a symphony of survival. Even more astonishing was their ability to unify disparate factions. Allied species, previously fractured by centuries of rivalry, responded to human leadership with unprecedented cohesion. It was as though the humans had become a gravitational force of will, drawing disorganized fleets into coordinated action. Enemy ships faltered, hesitant to fire, uncertain of what the humans would do next. The unpredictability was a weapon in itself, one that no algorithm or tactical model could counter. In the final hours of battle, the battlefield resembled a tapestry of fire, explosions, and debris. One human leader, General Kale Rin, bloodied, unbroken, yet standing with the calm authority of a being who had faced impossible odds before, emerged onto the command deck of the flagship. Surrounding him, monitors displayed the destruction and chaos unfolding in real time. And still, he did not despair. His rallying cry was not one of vengeance or hatred. It was a call for unity, for survival, for the collective will of his people and their allies. The tone resonated across communication channels, across fleet networks, and across species. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to counter, impossible to predict. Entire fleets hesitated. Some turned aside, unwilling to challenge such audacity. Others recalibrated, unsure whether the humans were executing a tactic or improvising in the moment. And the humans exploited every hesitation. One by one, enemy formations faltered,
not because of overwhelming firepower, but because no force, no calculation could anticipate the humans' next move. Even the most seasoned commanders, beings who had survived millennia of war and strategy, were left in disbelief, forced to reconsider everything they knew about engagement, combat, and survival. Observation decks, scattered across multiple galaxies, recorded an unprecedented phenomenon. Humans had not merely survived the engagement, they had rewritten the rules of galactic warfare. Their vessels, seemingly fragile and inadequate, executed maneuvers that leveraged emotion, intuition, and collective will in ways that no other species had ever attempted. Sacrifice became a tool of strategy, courage became a tactical advantage. Entire enemy fleets were routed, their command disrupted not by superior numbers, but by the humans' audacity and ingenuity. And as the battle drew to its conclusion, the realization settled among us like a cold shadow. Humans were apex predators, masquerading as fragile beings. Their strength was not in size or technology, but in the combination of resilience, emotional depth, and improvisational brilliance. Algorithms, predictive models, and even the most sophisticated warships were inadequate against a species that could adapt instinctively, that could inspire loyalty and fear simultaneously, that could bend chaos to its advantage. We cataloged the engagement in our archives with a mixture of awe and dread.
Across all observational platforms, data streams, and historical records, the designation we assigned to this era was unspoken but universally understood. The humans were no longer merely participants in galactic affairs. They were forces of nature, unpredictable, unstoppable, awe-inspiring. Their actions created ripples that would persist long after the battle's physical remnants faded into the void. The psychological impact on the galaxy was immediate. Species that had considered themselves dominant now recalculated strategy not around firepower, but around human unpredictability. Where once alliances were formed on mutual advantage or intimidation, they now required consideration of humans' instinctive brilliance. Even the most rigid bureaucracies paused, unsure how to measure a species that operated simultaneously on intellect, emotion, and sheer willpower. And yet, despite their triumph, humans showed no hubris. They did not celebrate victory with arrogance or cruelty. They mourned losses, tended to the injured, and prepared for the next challenge with the same calm determination that had carried them through every prior catastrophe. Their presence was a paradox, fragile yet indomitable, unpredictable yet deliberate, emotional yet strategic. From the vantage of our observation decks, we could only record, analyze, and attempt to comprehend, but comprehension failed. Even the most advanced species, trained over millennia to assess threats and probabilities, struggled to predict or explain the humans' methods. They were the embodiment of adaptation, courage, and ingenuity intertwined, a species whose impact could not be confined to tactical manuals or historical precedent. And as the final debris of the engagement drifted across the void, we whispered a truth that none dared speak aloud. The humans had altered the galaxy itself, not through raw power, but through the precision of will, the audacity of spirit, and the depth of character. They were no longer a species to monitor, catalog, or contain. They were a force, a phenomenon, an apex predator whose camouflage was fragility and whose weapon was resilience. We watched them depart the battlefield, battered yet unbroken, leaving silence in the void where the combined might of the galaxy had once threatened to annihilate them. And in that silence, one truth became undeniable. The humans had not merely survived, they had reshaped the very fabric of galactic engagement. No algorithm could anticipate them. No starship could contain them. They were unpredictable. They were unstoppable. They were awe-inspiring. And the question lingered, echoing across observation decks and archives alike. If such beings can survive the impossible, what will they achieve when the entire galaxy is aligned against them? Centuries passed, yet the humans' presence never faded. Across star systems, their deeds became legend, whispered in the corridors of empires and encoded in archives spanning thousands of worlds.
They did not conquer by fleets or weapons, but by the awe they inspired, the sheer audacity of being. Their mythos grew, carried on the tales of survivors and the records of observers like myself, a humble chronicler who watched civilizations rise and fall while humans endured. Their victories were studied as much as they were feared. Other species attempted to emulate their strategies, their improvisation, their instinctive brilliance in moments of crisis. Fleet commanders simulated human tactics, generals tried to reproduce their audacity, scholars debated the psychology behind their cohesion, yet all attempts failed. The human's genius lay not in calculation alone, nor in raw power, but in an instinctive alchemy, intellect fused with emotion, audacity tempered with resilience, courage intertwined with creativity. No algorithm, no AI, no advanced species could replicate it. Humans celebrated victories, often modestly, yet they mourned their losses with profound depth. Every fallen comrade became a lesson, every hardship a catalyst for innovation. They pressed forward not for glory or domination, but for creation, survival, and protection of their kin and allies. Their persistence was unrelenting, their curiosity inexhaustible, and their courage a force of nature that rippled outward, reshaping perceptions and challenging assumptions about what it meant to endure, to lead, and to influence. We observers often debated their place in the cosmos. Were humans the product of evolution perfected by resilience, honed through millennia of adversity, or were they anomalies, defying categorization entirely, existing outside the natural order, an unpredictable variable in a universe of constants? Whatever the origin, the result was undeniable. Humans did not merely participate in galactic affairs, they transformed them. Where once conflict seemed immutable, the presence of humans introduced uncertainty and possibility. Where alliances had hardened into rigidity, humans inspired cooperation and loyalty through the sheer force of character. Even species once dismissive of them began to reassess their assumptions. Observers recorded the subtle, almost imperceptible influence humans had on diplomacy, war, culture, and philosophy. Entire civilizations adapted, not merely to survive, but to coexist with, and in some cases learn from, the human example. Their methods, though often chaotic and unpredictable, were always effective. And the effect was cumulative, spreading across light years and generations. A species that had once seemed fragile became a benchmark for audacity, resilience, and innovation. Humans remained enigmatic. Their motives were complex, their emotions layered, and their decisions often confounding to those of us accustomed to predictability. Yet their actions were consistent in one essential truth. They pressed forward, regardless of risk, failure, or expectation. They were driven by an unquenchable desire to create, to endure, to protect.
And in that drive lay their ultimate weapon, the ability to inspire loyalty, command respect, and instill fear without ever raising a weapon. Their legacy was not inscribed on monuments or encoded solely in archives. It was etched into the consciousness of every species, fortunate or unfortunate enough to witness them. Where once civilizations measured dominance in fleets or colonies, they now measured influence, ingenuity, and courage. To underestimate humans was not merely folly, it was a risk that could cascade into catastrophe. And across the galaxy, species began to recalibrate, subtly or overtly, in response to this indomitable force. As I, a chronicler, record these events, I am struck by the quiet, unsettling reverence they command. Observing humans is to witness a paradox, fragile in appearance, yet capable of shaping the destiny of galaxies. Predictable in some ways, yet in every crucial moment, astonishingly unexpected. Emotional, yet methodical. Reckless, yet brilliantly strategic. Every act, every decision, every risk compounds into a singular truth. Humans are apex predators disguised as dreamers, architects of chaos and order, a force that the cosmos itself must acknowledge. And so, across centuries, light years, and civilizations, their story continues, not merely as participants, but as catalysts, as anomalies, as icons of audacity and resilience. They leave behind not just records, but echoes, ripples of courage and ingenuity that force every observer to reconsider the rules of survival, influence, and power. They remind the galaxy that strength is not measured solely by weapons or numbers, but by the unyielding will to endure, adapt, and inspire. In the end, the human's legacy is a warning and a revelation. Underestimate them at your peril. They are fragile in form, yet colossal in spirit, small in stature, yet immense in effect. They are apex predators cloaked as dreamers, their influence a force of nature that will echo through the cosmos for eons. And as I close this chronicle, recording the events of centuries with careful precision, I am left with one immutable truth. The galaxy may bend, civilizations may rise and fall, but humans endure, relentless, unpredictable, unstoppable. and awe-inspiring.